We started going to party meetings when we were 4 years old, my sister and I. So and they were always at the Ukrainian Hall because that was the most welcoming place in Drumheller. The community itself was, as Jack was talking about with his community, really split. And it was the Slavic population and the Eastern European population that were sympathetic, and the English population in Drumheller were, well, we considered them the enemy. So that's the way the community was. Newcastle, which is now part of the city of Drumheller, at that time was a little community where coal miners lived, and that's where the Ukrainian Hall was.
Do you remember any other people coming through your little town? Whose names we'd recall?
Yes. My sister and I spent half our lives sleeping on the floor because someone was always sleeping in our bed. Tim Buck, the leader of the Communist Party, Leslie Morris, the leader of the Communist Party, A. MacLeod, who was, I believe, an organizer for the Communist Party. I need maybe some prompting for other names, but I recall a lot of other people. James Endicott used to come to Drumheller a lot, but he never stayed. He always stayed in the hotel room. Always in the same hotel room, too, because the hotel room was bugged. And they'd go, when Dad would take him to the hotel room, he'd say, okay, we're going to have a chat, but he'd get out his pencil and tap it on the table. And my dad would say, why are you doing such a thing? And he'd say, well, because they can't hear us talking. All they can hear is the tapping. And so it was part of the Cold War thing, I guess. So there were a lot of people that passed through our home. The different groups would come, and sometimes there would be 50 people in the house, and the house was really only big enough for 5. However, it didn't matter. That was the way it was, and my mother was always good at watering the soup. So there were lots of people around.
I want you to talk a little further about Tim Buck. Most people didn't have a chance to meet him. They hear a lot about him. What kind of man was he? What do you remember of him? The second thing that I want you to talk about, if you can, is if you remember some of the, there are the good times, if you can remember some of the hard times that people went through, okay?
Absolutely. Well, I was very young when Tim Buck was part of our lives, but I recall him, as a very gentle man and a gentleman. Always very polite, always very neatly dressed, shirt and tie. Very good with kids, and always very impressed because my father had insisted that we attend all these political meetings, even when we were very young. And I remember him telling my dad at one point that, and we were only maybe 8 and 9 years old, that you don't have to worry about those two. They'll be active because once you teach them, nobody else will have a chance to influence them. I guess it worked. I guess it worked, but that's how I recall him. And always, but when he stood up to speak, nobody said a word. It was absolutely dead quiet. People listened and hung on every word he said, and they didn't always necessarily agree with him, but he had this charisma. He had a charisma that drew people to him, and he didn't ever put anybody down in terms of the questions that they asked. He answered them all, and because he was a working class person himself, there was no arrogance, there was no superiority about him. He was just one of the people that in the group, and was very respectful of everybody.